Welcome to today's lecture. Now we will cover the topics related to Chapter 2, Stakeholder Relationships, Social Responsibility in Corporate Governance. This chapter identifies stakeholders' different roles in business ethics, and it examines the relationship between businesses and various stakeholder groups and examines how a stakeholder framework can help understand organizational ethics. Then the chapter defines social responsibility and examines the relationships between having a stakeholder orientation and social responsibility. Finally, the chapter delineates how a stakeholder orientation helps to create corporate social responsibility. The chapter also examines corporate governance as a dimension of social responsibility and its role in structuring ethics and social responsibility within every single business. The ethical decision-making process is important in order to provide an understanding of the importance of oversight and responding to various stakeholders' needs. So how do we define stakeholders? Building effective relationships is considered one of the most important areas of business today, and it has been so in the past. A stakeholder framework helps identify the internal stakeholders, such as employees, board of directors, and managers, as well as external stakeholders, such as customers, special interest groups, regulators, and other groups who agree, disagree, collaborate, and engage in normal business transaction with the organization on a regular basis or on annual basis. In a business context, customers, investors, and shareholders, employees, suppliers, government agencies, communities, and others who have a stake or a claim in some aspect of the company's products, operations, markets, industry, and outcomes are all known as stakeholders. The survival and performance of any organization is a function of its ability to create value for all primary stakeholders. There are three approaches to stakeholder theory: normative, descriptive, and instrumental. So again, normative, descriptive, and instrumental approaches. The normative approach identifies ethical guidelines that dictate how companies ought to treat stakeholders. Principles and values provide direction for this expectation of how to treat stakeholders. The descriptive approach focuses on the firms and usually addresses how decisions and strategies are made for stakeholder relationships. The instrumental approach describes what will happen if firms behave in a particular way. The relationship between companies and their stakeholders is a two-way street. Stakeholders are influenced by business, but they also have the ability to affect businesses. Stakeholders apply their values and standards to many diverse issues: working conditions, consumers' rights, environmental conservation, product safety, and proper information disclosure that may or may not directly affect an individual stakeholder's own welfare. Stakeholders provide both tangible and intangible resources that can be critical to a company's long-term success. When individual stakeholders share similar expectations about desirable business conduct, they may choose to organize into communities. Ethical misconduct can damage a company's reputation, causing stakeholders to withdraw valuable resources, especially if they are the shareholders or stockholders. So this gives stakeholders power over the business. So we need to identify the primary and secondary stakeholders. Stakeholders can be divided into two categories, as I mentioned earlier: primary and secondary stakeholders. Primary stakeholders are those whose continued association is necessary for a company's survival. These would include employees, customers, investors, and stockholders, and governments and communities, that provide the necessary infrastructure for the organization to operate and obviously provide a benefit to their constituencies, and their constituencies would obviously pay for the services the company provides. Therefore, both groups benefit the organization and the constituencies. So primary stakeholders are those whose continued association is necessary for a company's survival, like employees, customers, investors, and stockholders, and governments and communities that provide necessary infrastructure. Secondary stakeholders do not typically engage in transactions and are not essential for its survival, like the media, trade associations, and special interest groups. Although primary groups may present more day-to-day concerns, secondary groups cannot be ignored or given less consideration in the ethical decision-making process. The stakeholder interaction model indicates that there are two-way relationships between the firm and a host of other stakeholders. So you need to have a stakeholder orientation within your organization. Every organization needs to have a stakeholder orientation. The degree to which a company understands and addresses stakeholder demands can be expressed as a stakeholder orientation. A stakeholder orientation involves activities and processes within a system of social institutions that facilitate and maintain value through exchange relationships with multiple stakeholders simultaneously. A stakeholder orientation comprises three sets of activities. First, the organization-wide generation of data about stakeholder groups and assessment of firms' effects on these groups. Second, the distribution of this information throughout the company. And third, the organization's responsiveness as a whole to this intelligence. Given the variety of employees involved in the generation of information about stakeholders, it is important and perhaps essential the information gathered be circulated throughout the firm to all organizational members, or at least relevant employees who need access to that information. A stakeholder orientation is not complete unless it includes activities that address stakeholder issues. Responsiveness processes may involve the participation of the concerned stakeholder groups. A stakeholder orientation can be viewed as a continuum as firms adopt the concept to varying degrees. Let us talk a little bit now about social responsibility and ethics. The concepts of ethics and social responsibility are often used interchangeably, although each has its own meaning. Social responsibility is an organization's obligation to maximize its positive impact on stakeholders and minimize negative impact. It can also be viewed as a contract with society or the communities where the company operates. Business ethics involves carefully thought out rules or heuristics of business conduct that guide decision making for employees. There are 4 levels of social responsibility, which include economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic, and they can be viewed as separate steps. The term corporate citizenship is often used to express the extent to which businesses strategically meet the economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic responsibilities placed on them by the various stakeholders that are primary or secondary within that organization. Corporate citizenship has 4 interrelated dimensions. Number 1, strong, sustained economic performance is a must, otherwise the company will not survive. 2 is rigorous compliance with local, national, and federal laws. In other words, we must abide by the legal responsibilities imposed on us by the government. 3rd is ethical actions beyond what the law actually requires. So sometimes you have to go beyond the law to be considered ethical. And finally, 4th is the voluntary contribution that advances the reputation and stakeholder commitment of the company. We need to keep in mind that reputation is one of the organization's greatest intangible assets with tangible value. The value of a positive reputation is difficult to quantify, but it is very, very important for the success and sustainability of every single organization. We need to keep in mind that social responsibility rests on a stakeholder orientation. Companies nowadays are looking at broader issues that consider the long-term welfare of society. Each stakeholder is given due consideration. Long-term relationships with stakeholders develop trust, loyalty in the performance that is necessary to maintain profitability over time. Issues generally associated with social responsibility can be separated into various general categories of social issues: consumer protection, sustainability, and even corporate governance. Social issues are associated with the common good and deal with concerns that affect large segments of society and the welfare of our entire society. There is a need to reflect on issues indirectly related to business, such as jobs lost through outsourcing, health issues, in gun rights when developing strategies in certain cases. Issues that more directly relate to business can include obesity, smoking, and exploiting vulnerable or impoverished populations, as well as a number of other issues. Data privacy is one of the most important social and ethical issues facing marketing today. There's a need to address the ethical and legal responsibilities to determine risk and develop protection to consumers. All organizations need to understand how to develop cybersecurity and have contingency plans to respond if a data breach happens. With big data and the need to collect consumer data comes the responsibility to establish a data privacy ethical culture as a top priority. Consumer protection often occurs in the form of laws passed to protect consumers from unfair and deceptive business practices. These issues usually have an immediate impact on the consumer after a product has been purchased. Major areas of concern can include advertising, environmental hazard, financial practices, and even product safety. Because consumers are often less knowledgeable about new products, it is the responsibility of companies to take precautions preventing consumers from being harmed by their products. Deceptive advertising has been a very, very hot topic in consumer protection area. And some advertising practices actually skirt the line between ethical and questionable behavior. So companies must be knowledgeable about consumer protection laws and recognize whether their practices could be construed as deceptive or unfair by the community and by the law. Sustainability is defined as the potential for long-term well-being of the natural environment, and businesses can no longer ignore the environment as a stakeholder. So the environment is becoming an important primary in some cases, in other cases secondary stakeholder. This topic of understanding stakeholders provide a good overview of the issues, the conflicts, and the opportunities for understanding more about stakeholder relationships. Remember that ethical behavior is a skill. You need to evaluate and improve your ethical muscles in fitness every single day. Good luck.